Hello everyone. Can everyone hear me at the back? Awesome. So my name is Leah, and I'm a PhD student, and I work on parasites. And I'm going to talk today about parasites and how they're unwelcome visitors in your body. So I'm going to hopefully get some of you guys to come and join in and have a go at some of our demos. There's probably more of you here that will get a chance to go in, but if you want to come and look at stuff at the end, please do come down and do some stuff to see. If you want to ask a question, you can put up your hands. If I have time, I'll answer it now. If not, come and talk to me at the end. Does that sound okay? Cool. Okay, so just one brief plug before you go to the talk. I just wanted to tell you about chaos. So chaos stands for Cambridge Hands-on Science and describes what we do. We're a bunch of students and we do lots of science demos like this in Cambridgeshire and further afield. So if you guys want us to come to your school, drop us an email, put us on the internet, and we might be able to bring a load of these kind of demos to you. And if you've got some time afterwards, go over to that entrance under the whale and you can have a go at lots of hands-on demos in a thing called Crash Bang Squelch if you haven't been already. So there's lots more stuff like this. Cool, okay, so to start, have any of you guys ever seen about food chain before? Can you put your hand up if you've seen about that before? Cool, okay, that's a lot of you. Can anyone describe how a normal food chain works? Yeah? Yeah. Yeah, so it's small as the biggest. Excellent, spot on. So if you didn't hear that at the back, so you have a small organism. Sometimes it's something that eats plants. Sometimes it's something that makes its own food, like a plant. That's eaten by a bigger thing, which is eaten by a bigger thing, which is eaten by a bigger thing. And that's the food chain. So you might have something like a tiger or a shark at the top of the food chain. That's how a normal food chain works. What about parasites? Where do parasites fit into a normal food chain? Does anyone know what a parasite really does? Does anyone want to shout out where parasites live? Is there anyone else who wants to shout out? Yeah, over there. In a space. So yeah, they live in spaces. They don't live on their own. They live with other things. On your body, yeah? Host of somebody. So that's the word we'll use. So the word host, when we're talking about parasites, is the thing that the parasite lives in or lives on. So parasites basically break the normal food chains. They don't eat something bigger than them, so smaller than them. They live inside or on something that's really bigger than them. Do you reckon people are host of parasites? What about other animals? Yes? No? Yeah, spot on. Well done, guys. So lots of things that have parasites. There's even some crazy cases where parasites have parasites that live inside them. So it's kind of like a little Russian doll if you've never seen them before. Okay, so let's think about people. Where do you think parasites could live on a person? In the hair, yeah? We'll go back to it in a minute. So on the skin. Where else? Go pick it. In their bodies, yeah. So you can have them inside you as well. So you can have them on the outside or the inside. Where inside your body? And have them chuck a green t-shirt there. In your gut, yes. Very good answer. So we'll come back to that in a second. The first type of parasite, well, we're going to talk about these types of parasites. So there's ectoparasites, and the word ecto means outside. We'll come back to the second. Parasitic worms, these are things that live inside your guts. And protozoa, which are another kind of organism that live inside bits of your body, which are even more cunning than the rest. So firstly, ectoparasites. The word ecto just means outside, so it's just basically a fancy scientific way of saying outside parasites. Here's one. Does anyone recognise this guy? Do you want to shout out if you've heard it before? Head lice, yeah. Has anyone had head lice before? Oh, wow, okay. I'm not going to ask who has head lice now, because then people might decide. The head lice do you any harm? Do you like having them? Why don't you like having them? Itchy, I heard itchy, so scratch your hair. How do these parasites live? What are they doing? Are they just chilling in your hair? Do they eat you? Do they suck your blood? Anyone know? Is that right? They live in your hair, yeah, they live their eggs in the hair. They'll go from eggs, and they'll get bigger, and they'll turn into these little critters with lots of eggs. And they'll make their living off bits of stuff with your scalp. Yeah, bits of dead things, skin, stuff like that. Not very nice to be around. So those are ectoparasites. Can anyone think of any more that their pets might have? Anyone shout out? Fleas, yeah, those guys aren't nice either. You can itch you and scratch in the head lice. How do you get rid of them? You see, anyone had to have this done to them? Yeah. So you can get rid of them by combing them out, and you can probably get nasty smelling shampoos. Yeah, does that sound familiar? So that's finding a way of using a chemical to get rid of the parasite, and it's finding a kind of, I don't know, I guess, non-chemical way of getting rid of the parasite and pulling them out manually. Okay, so those are parasites we're kind of familiar on. Those are fairly common in the UK. They reckon about 1 in 3 primary school kids gets head lice every year, which is quite a lot. So I guess most of you will have head lice 2 or 3 times before you leave primary school. A bit itchy. Could be a lot worse than head lice. So we're going to talk about parasitic worms next. So these are worms that live inside you. And I would describe them as living inside a surface inside you if they live in your gut. Because if you kind of think about it, if you eat food, you have stuff in and the food comes out the other end. It's not all going inside your body, it's kind of like another surface. It's a protected surface, but they're kind of on the surface. Does that kind of make sense? Do these look like parasites to you? Oh. Has anyone seen these guys before? Do you want to shout out? Where do you see them? I saw in the garden. So these are normal earthworms. So just before you get massively paranoid when you go gardening or digging, not every worm you see is parasitic. I don't want to give you that impression. It's a lifestyle choice that some worms make. Not all worms. Some worms are doing useful things. Not all of them. There are 3 types of parasitic worms. And the easiest way to think about them is by their shape. So I thought, well, I could get some pictures of what these worms look like. But that's a bit boring. So we've got some ones in jars. So hopefully you'll be able to see these on the camera. See if it works. Can you see that? Just about. You can see my hands in to get the size. Do you see this end? That's the end that grips on to the inside of your guts. It's its head end. Do you see the other bits? What does it look like? Do you want to shout out? Tape? Okay, yeah. So it's tapeworm. That is exactly why they're called that. So this kind of worm actually came from inside a pig. But you get very similar worms inside of people. This is actually only a really little bit of this worm. I've got some demos to show you how big they would actually be. Does anyone recognise this stuff? It's not actually parasitic worms. Do you want to shout out? Pasta. So actually, having had some real worms in my lab, it kind of looks a lot like pasta. It kind of put me off pasta for 2 or 3 days by thinking it looked a lot like worms. It turns out that about that much pasta, I used my tape measure to measure it this morning, is about 2 meters, which is about that long. Pretty long, taller than I am. And that is how much you might usually get inside a pig. So I'm going to pass these around, one per row. So have a look, have a shake and imagine what would that be like when you're inside. So have a good look at that and imagine living with that inside you. So that's how much a normal or kind of average worm would grow to. What about this box? Lots. So this is actually about the record size from these pig worms. That's about 45 meters. I know. Can you imagine how much that would eat? This is quite a lot of pasta, but I did measure it out. I spent quite a long time this morning measuring it. One worm would have been that long. Does anyone want to have that inside them? So where are these worms getting their food from? They're not going eating plants. Where are they getting their nutrients? Do you want to shout out? Food. They're stealing from their host. So if you chill out the intestines, there's quite a lot of good food there. That's what your intestines are good at. So you can absorb food from there. And actually, if you can avoid the body's defences, you can live a long and happy life. Some people can have some types of worms for tens of years and they'll be quite happy. It's only when you get too many of them. What do you think would happen if you had too many worms? Die, or that would be in extreme cases. That can happen.
Lose weight.
Lose weight, yeah. You just get skinnier and skinnier, and you can't figure out why. And that's quite often when you have worms. So many of the worms I'm going to mention don't necessarily kill you, but if they make you really ill, that means you might not be able to go to school, you might not be able to go to work, and that can really be bad for lots of people in the community who have worms. So that's one of the reasons that scientists are trying to think of ways to kill these guys. So if anyone wants to look at this, I'll leave it on the front desk at the end and you can come and have a look in detail. Okay, so that's tapeworms. What about this one? How would you describe the shape of that? Yeah. Kind of red. I would go and say it's a round worm. Can you kind of see that? It looks a bit more like the earthworm. Yeah. So this guy's another group called roundworms. Another name that scientists give them is nematodes. So it's basically the same thing. So that's kind of describes. They're not quite the same shape, but they also got very happy living inside you. I've got one more. This one's hard to see on here. Can you see that it's black? Yeah, it's not necessarily that obvious. It looks a little bit like a sheet of paper. Maybe if I hold it up, you can see it's thin. It's a very flat worm, yeah, it's called a liver fluke. So this guy would chill out inside your liver. Not very nice. Cool. Okay. So you mentioned there were these three kind of worms. Tapeworms, the big flat guys. Flukes, those black ones, and roundworms. So here's a picture of that small guy that I was showing you earlier, the tapeworm. You see how long it is. If the pasta's still going round, it kind of looks like that, yeah? Do you reckon? So if we zoom in, I pointed out the head. Have a look at that. What do you see at the top? Kind of like teeth. What kind of shape are they? Hooks. So those hooks are for grabbing on to the insides. Not very nice. So this is a life cycle diagram of these worms. So if you look at parasites, they all have these cool, complicated diagrams describing what things they can live inside and where they go. Like I said, mentioned, this is a pig tapeworm. So these pigs can get it. They can get it through contaminated, eating the eggs from contaminated foods. And then sometimes humans get it by either being near pigs or by eating meat that's not cooked properly. So if that's one reason to cook meat properly, to avoid getting tapeworms, I think it's probably worth it. Cool. Who wants some pet tapeworms? Anyone? No, cool. So there's another kind of parasite I mentioned. It's one called Protozoa. Has anyone heard of that before? Maybe a couple of people, but yeah, you probably won't have heard of it before. These often can live inside your body, even more inside than some of the worms can. The type of parasite I'm going to talk about mainly, that I work on, lives inside bits of your body called cells. Have people heard that word before? Maybe? So if you haven't heard the word cell, I would describe a cell as being a bit of a body in the same way a brick is a bit of a house. Living things are made of lots and lots of cells stacked together. And in humans, or anything else complicated, you have lots of different kinds of cells. Does anyone recognise these kind of cells? Do you want to shout out? Blood cells, yeah, awesome. Well done, guys. So these red round things are the bits of your body that carry around air from your lungs, bits of the air from your lungs to the rest of your body. So you might see them if you get cut. So those are normal red blood cells. Okay, you want to see what's wrong with this picture? How do red blood cells look different? Yeah? They're not as red, but I couldn't get the pictures to come out quite the same. But yeah, that's not the main bit. I know you're right. I should get a better picture. There's a guy at the back.
There's something in them.
There's something in them, exactly. So there's these things. What do the things inside them look like? Yeah. Kind of look research, yeah. So they're actually described as rings. So jewelry, yeah, definitely agree. So this shape of the parasites is described as rings. So these are called malaria parasites. Has anyone heard of these before? Cool. So does anyone know how you get malaria? Yeah. Yeah, when mosquito bites, you're spot on. So one of these guys, not very friendly. So this is another bit, and a parasite has a more complex life cycle. So you've got the parasite, those little things inside the cells I showed you before. You've got the host, in this case the human, and you've got a third party. I guess kind of like a criminal accomplice in a way, if you have a crime to be inside you. Except these guys get a pretty raw deal. The word for the thing that can move a parasite from one organism to another is called a vector. So you might come across that again at some point. So these guys get a pretty raw deal as vectors because the parasites, they'll suck up some blood that they think is nice and tasty and will have these parasites inside them. These parasites will then go into the stomach of the mosquito, grow there, and then bury through the mosquito's stomach and then move towards its head. And eventually, in a couple of weeks, they'll go into its head and get into the bits of the mosquito called the salivary glands, kind of like the bits that make spit new. And then when it goes and bites somebody else, it can give them new mosquito parasites, so new malaria parasites. So, if you see a mosquito here, don't be too worried, because most of them won't be of the right kind to transmit malaria. So does anyone know what happens if you get malaria? No, you might not. So you end up feeling really rubbish. You get some sort of fever when you feel really hot. And that happens about once every 48 hours or every 2 days. What that's happening is when those little things inside those red blood cells, they grow and grow and grow. And once they've eaten the red blood cell, they'll burst out, go and find a new home. And that happens all at the same time. So every 48 hours, they destroy your blood and then go and find a new home. And that makes you feel pretty rubbish. And it's just a quick cartoon to show you how that is happening in the mosquito. I've picked that quick cartoon because this one is far too complicated to talk about in a 20-minute talk. But if you put malaria life cycle on the internet, you can learn all about the different kind of complex shapes. Cool, okay. That's lots of big words. I want to do something cool. We're going to see if we can make a blood smear, because that's how you tell if you have malaria. So if you're in a part of the world where you might get malaria, and you had a fever, we wanted to check. We look at your blood, and we might be able to see, like those pictures, if you've got malaria parasites inside your blood. But if I did a small one here, you guys wouldn't be able to see it very well. So I've got some bigger microscope slides. Can you see those from the back? So would anyone like to come and help me make a giant blood smear? Ooh, I'm going to go for 2 people to help me do this. This chap here and a girl on this third row. So you can give them a big round of applause for helping. So can you carry this? Is that too heavy? What's your name? Emily, cool. What's your name? Liberty, cool. So we've got 2 jobs. So if you pop that down in a second. So the one person's job is to squidge out some blood. And the trouble with blood is that no one really wants to give you blood, but you do it messy. So we've got this. What's this? Ketchup. Does that look like normal ketchup? Yeah. So normal ketchup. If we had a lot of blood, we could do this, but I figure this is easier. And it smells nicer too. So what I want you to do is to put a big squelch of blood on this one. And then once you've done that, what we're going to do here is we're going to move the slide across to smear up blood. Yeah, big squelch. Yeah, awesome. That'll do nicely. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to drag it along like this. You have to come on this side. And then we'll see if we can smear it out, okay? Oh, yeah, it likes to spread out. Awesome. So we've got a bit there. Brilliant. That's nice and messy, isn't it? Awesome. Now the next bit, I'm going to wipe it off. This is going to get in the way. It's too much. This is too messy. I'd be a lot better at this in my lab. Can you grab the head, right? And if you turn it on, can you make it blow? Awesome. So if you can help me blow this. So if you want to blow it dry. So we're blowing it dry now to dry out the blood. So keep going. Excellent. We'll try and dry this out here. Awesome. And there's one last bit. So, can I ask you to hold this still now? Hold it behind. We're going to use a stain to see the parasites inside the blood. So, can I get you to pour that down? So, if you pour it around here, then you should go into the bucket. Awesome. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Can we get a big round of applause for these guys? So that is roughly, in 2 minutes, how we make an actual blood smear. It will just be slightly smaller if it was your blood. So I'm not sure how well you can see from the back, but hopefully you might believe me and say the thin red smear has now got a bit purpley coloured because we've used a stain. So we'll leave that there for a bit. We've now got ketchup everywhere. So here are some pictures of some real ones. How close does that look? Oh, okay. I wanted to do something you could all see, so hopefully that gives you the rough idea of how you can make a blood smear. We did it in exactly the same way. Smear it out across the top, and then do the same with this purple colour. The trouble with the purple colour in the lab is that unlike this food colouring, it doesn't come out of clothes, so this is actually quite nice. Okay, so now we've got our blood slides. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a microscope big enough to put the giant slides under, so I have to make do with some pictures. I've got some here. So my challenge for you, I might turn the lights down a little so you can see. Is that a little bit better? How many red blood cells with parasites inside do you see? Not how many parasites, how many red blood cells with things inside them? On the count of 3, I want you to shout out how many you see, okay? 1, 2, 3. 3. Awesome. You guys are brilliant, so that's good. Spot on. Now look at, if you didn't see them from the back, those are the 3 with parasite cells in. Now I'm going to give you a slightly harder challenge. On this one, I want you to count how many red blood cells there are, and then I want you to count how many parasite cells there are. If I give you a minute, do you reckon you guys can do that? Cool, okay, so I will give you about 30 seconds. Does that sound long enough? Ready, steady, and go. need more time? Is that okay? Okay, on the count of 3, I want you to count how many red blood cells you can see altogether. Does that make sense? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Ooh! Not everyone got quite the same number, which the point I'm making is that I didn't tell you if it was on the edge whether you should count it or not. So that's really important to decide if you're going to get consistent count between people. Does 50 sound a reasonable number from what most of you said? Can we go with 50? Okay, this one I think you might agree on more, hopefully. On the count of 3, can you shout out me how many parasite cells you saw? Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Ooh, quite a lot of them. So, who had a really small number? I'm trying to think who is. Can you shout out the numbers again, see if I can hear them all? Okay, 1, 2, 3. 17, I heard quite a lot. Does that sound about right for most people? Is that quite close to the number you had? So now we're going to get a percentage of how many parasite cells there are in this blood. So 50 is quite an easy number because I can just double it. So get out of 100. So if we had 50 parasites, if we double that to have 100 red blood cells, and we double 17, what number do we get if we double 17? Awesome, my math is still okay, that's good. So we have 34 parasite cells per 100 red blood cells. Does that sound like a lot? You don't always get that much. It really varies depending on how ill someone is and when about you count. But you can be surprised that even healthy adults in some parts of the world can carry around 1% of their red blood cells having parasites, and they're absolutely fine for reasons we don't quite understand. See if I can get more light. Maybe, maybe not. We'll carry on with that light, that's no problem. So I counted lots there. So, has anyone heard of the names of Didier Drogba or Cheryl Cole? Did you hear about it when they got malaria? Okay. Did you hear about it when 300 other million people got malaria in the rest of the world? No. The reason is that most people get malaria aren't in countries that are sort of around us. They're in places like Africa or South America or Asia. And most of these countries are really poor, and it's really quite hard to treat them. So you get a lot of malaria, and they actually kill as many as 1 million children every year. It's a really sad number, but about every 30 seconds a kid dies of malaria somewhere in Africa. So that's about 60 people at the time of this talk. It's quite sad, but there's hope. Some drugs don't work anymore, but scientists are working on them. And eventually they hope that people will be able to make a vaccine so that people won't get these parasites in the first place. So I thought that was a little bit depressing to end there, so I thought I'd give you a happy ending to this story. Something like mealworm. So, just a caveat, there's a really gross picture coming up, so if you don't want to see it, close your eyes now. So this is one of these roundworms, and you can get it by being in infected water. It's transmitted by little fleas and things. So it turns out that in there's a lot of people who've been working together to clean up the water supply. And if I looked on the website today, that they recorded 0 cases of this kind of worm in January, the last figures we have records for. So by people working together to get clean water in developing parts of the world, you can get rid of these parasites. And hopefully, maybe even other diseases like malaria or these tapeworms I mentioned might eventually get out to 0. Fingers crossed. Cool. So I wanted to say a massive round of applause to everyone who shouted out or took part or volunteered. Thanks very much. Thank you for listening. And if you'd like to come and see these parasites up close, come by on your way out. Thanks very much.